As previously discussed, the perspective of utilizing knowledge as the primary source of competitive advantage became known as knowledge-based view, or KBV, as an extension of RBV. The limitation of KBV is that it conceives both tacit and explicit knowledge as an objectively definable commodity. The KBV implies that knowledge is a static internal resource in organizations, which can be controlled, exploited, and traded like most physical resources. As a result, information systems are often developed attempting to capture, store, retrieve, and transmit knowledge between units, departments, organizations, and individuals. However, knowledge cannot be regarded as a static resource. Even though knowledge can realistically be accumulated and stored, it may not create superior values to organizations, because it is not primarily the stocks of knowledge, but the transformation of knowledge into a process, business plan, good reputation, or strong culture that creates value for organizations. In other words, the people who are able to use the knowledge creates value for organizations. This flow of knowledge is extremely essential to organizational success. In other words, the people using the knowledge are extremely essential for organizational success. Various methods have been suggested to visualize and understand organizational intellectual resources. Of these, only the balanced scorecard will be discussed here. Balanced scorecard was first introduced by Robert Kaplan and David Norton as a tool for business organizations to convert intangible assets such as corporate culture and employee knowledge into tangible outcomes. It includes a set of measures to monitor organizational performance across 4 linked perspectives, as they are diagrammed here on this slide. They include financial, customer, internal processes, and learning and growth. It is the cause-effect relationship among these 4 measures, both financial and non-financial, that distinguish balanced scorecard from other strategic management systems. Financial measures provide information about past performance, while non-financial measures are able to drive future performance. Today, the balanced scorecard is widely used in the for-profit and public sectors. However, there are a number of reasons to suggest that the balanced scorecard offers an inferior framework for the nonprofit context, particularly in the social service nonprofit subsector. Balanced scorecard proposes a strategy which is formulated and executed under the assumption that presupposed existence of a stable target group of customers are always in place. However, the concept of customers does not really exist in the social service nonprofit sector. The beneficiaries of the nonprofit services are typically different from those who provide material support. And strategic management approaches are based primarily on the notion of competition and customers that are generally unacceptable to the social service nonprofit sector. Also, there is a concern that the cause and effect relationships among the 4 balanced scorecard perspectives are logical rather than causal. It is always assumed that in balanced scorecard that learning and growth drives efficient internal processes. Then that drives a high level of customer satisfaction, and that drives good financial outcomes. The assumption about the logical cause and effect relationships is less convincing in social service nonprofit organizations because the organizations are accountable to multiple constituents. It almost guarantees that the cause and effect relationships do not work in social service nonprofit organizations because logical fallacies could lead to an inaccurate anticipation of performance indicators. The third reason to suggest that balanced scorecard offers an inferior framework is that it is criticized for being fairly rigid because the 4 linked perspectives and the indicators within them are relatively limiting. The potential risk is that nonprofit leaders and managers may be misled by focusing only on the four perspectives in Balanced Scorecard and may end up missing other equally important factors in their organizations. There are also shortcomings for the individual perspectives when applying them in social service nonprofit organizations. In considerations on the external environment in Balanced Scorecard are only limited to customers, and there is no clear-cut human resource element focus in the four Balanced Scorecard perspectives. The fourth reason it may be an inferior approach is the financial and non-financial performance indicators are likely to be negatively related because non-financial indicators focus on future investments and financial measures stress present and historic performance. Accordingly, Balanced Scorecard may not be appropriate in social service nonprofit organizations under the unique nonprofit environments in the knowledge economy, as it is likely to mislead nonprofit leaders and managers to focus more on short-term financial objectives rather than long-term intellectual resource investments. Despite the fact that many nonprofit organizations have attempted to adapt traditional for-profit strategic management approaches, there is still a need for a competent strategic management framework in social service nonprofit organizations. There is a growing need for a new nonprofit strategic management framework. It should not only help social service nonprofit organizations to improve their performance, but also to preserve and regain their cherished qualities. Organizations must place the social dimensions at the center of their strategy. This is displayed in Figure 1. The authors argue that, unlike other for-profit strategic management concepts, the concept of IC, or intellectual capital, can be used as a competent strategic management conceptual framework in the social service nonprofit sector, in particular in today's knowledge economy. Intellectual capital encompasses three primary and interrelated non-financial components: human capital, structural capital, and relational capital. Human capital includes various human resource elements, including attitude, competency, experience and skills, tacit knowledge, and the innovativeness and talents of people. It represents the tacit knowledge embedded in the minds of people in organizations. Structural capital refers to the learning and knowledge enacted in day-to-day activities. It includes all the non-human storehouses of knowledge in organizations, such as databases, process manuals, strategies, routines, organizational culture, publications, and copyrights, which create value for organizations, thus adding to the organization's material value. Relational capital characterizes an organization's formal and informal relations with its external stakeholders and the perceptions that they hold about the organization, as well as the exchange of knowledge between the organization and its external stakeholders. What constitutes the IC components for one organization may not be the same for another. This unique characteristic is compatible with RBV's four attributes of firm resources, which are rare, valuable, costly to imitate, and non-substitutable. Intellectual capital becomes the main differentiating factor that provides a competitive market position to an organization. It gives rise to income in a knowledge-based economy as compared with an industrial-based economy. Intellectual capital is about attempting to balance the transferring and converting of knowledge, external and internal, to an organization. Intellectual capital may be the most appropriate strategy for social service nonprofit organizations as it helps shift focus to intellectual resources. These include knowledge, skills, and experience. In profit-making organizations, profits serve as a simple common language for communication, delegation, and coordination, and as a means to measure organizational success and benchmark performance. Social service nonprofit organizations, however, have no uniformity of financial goals that can be applied as a means of communication to compare goods and services that they produce. The intellectual capital approach forces nonprofit leaders to rethink their mission. Social service nonprofit organizations are vulnerable under for-profit strategic management techniques which stress cost savings and value for money. Intellectual capital becomes important to social service nonprofit organizations not only because it helps the organization to avoid goal displacement and resource diffusion, but also because it assists them to refocus their objectives on the social dimensions, which are sometimes distorted by operating in commercial contract environments under the public sector reform movement. Most organizational resources have either decreasing or increasing returns through their lifetime. Intellectual capital, however, does not decrease in value with use. This draws another important point that if a model is to apply to social service nonprofit organizations, it must be kept simple and easy to use or disseminate through the whole organization. Peppard and Rylander argue that intellectual capital resources can be used simultaneously by many users in different locations and at the same time, and thereby are non-competitive in an economic sense. Intellectual capital is flexible and easy to understand because it represents the collection of intellectual resources and their flows. Accordingly, intellectual capital can serve as a simple conceptual framework for social service nonprofit organizations that require relatively little interpretation. Intellectual capital allows social service nonprofit organizations to pursue their social objectives and use their resources effectively and simultaneously to sustain their cherished qualities. I hope you've enjoyed reading this article. It has done a good job of explaining various strategic management approaches and why some may or may not be useful in the nonprofit sector. Once you've completed all the readings and completed all the lecture videos, you may complete the assignments for this week. Good luck.